this second session of Transcending Contempt. Those of us who are doing this live have just had half an hour where we've been able to share with one another the experience of the first practice after the first session, which is practicing WAG, wonder, attention, and gratitude. And Tanner is here joining me because he was facilitating the discussion of those folks on Zoom, about 5 or 6, I think, folks on Zoom, and there are about 30 or so of us here who broke into groups to talk about. Most of our groups, Tanner, emphasized, I think partly because we were only talking for 15 minutes, went mostly with the wonder and the attention and not much getting to the gratitude, but a lot of broad experiences of wondering and paying attention to different sorts of things. Nature in general, some detail of nature, some learning about ways animals perform in nature, refreshing a relationship of 58 years by approaching a well-known spouse in a new and different way, approaching mundane tasks like washing the dishes with wonder, attention, and gratitude, and allowing that to shift our experience of something we might otherwise not pay attention to. An experience of teaching where multiple kids are asking questions at the same time and practicing paying attention to just one at a time rather than trying to do the juggling act. So those are some of the things that seem to come up in our groups. Tanner, what are some examples of things that came up in yours?
Yeah, sounds very similar. I mean, we talked about the three worlds: the universe, the metaverse, and the cosmos, and how, you know, the universe isn't just that scientific materialist thing, but it's also the world of like business and commerce and worrying about your 401k and all that. And that as well is not the world I want to dwell in. It's a part of the cosmos, which is a gift from God. And Lori said, you know, the antidote to the metaverse is nature. And everybody was like, yeah, we agree on that. And she talked about how she takes walks every day and listens to podcasts. But this week, she turned the podcast off. And she was like, I heard the birds. And she was like, it was quite amazing, you know? And then I started to hear the differences of their songs. And are they talking to each other? And then the colors of the birds and how they flock or don't flock and what behaviors they do. And she just kept going and kept going. And then she noticed the sky and the clouds. And so I just thought that was great. I mean, but, you know, Candy also talked about she's raising flowers. And that brings so much wonder to her. Tending and raising flowers. And I was like, that takes attention too, right? You got to have attention for that. Another thing that Margaret said was, you know, find wonder and beauty. Find yourself, get yourself to the De Young, you know, get yourself to where even the park back up here, you know, get out. And I know a lot of us do that. And, but, you know, she had a great, wonderful experience this week because one of her friends got her photos accepted into an exhibit at the De Young.
Wow.
So that's really cool. And Margaret Lee was on, and I don't know if you all know Margaret Lee, but Margaret Lee kind of is wonder, attention, and gratitude in her being. And so, you know, I think we just really reflected a lot of what you guys all, sounds like what you all were talking about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tanner. Thank you. And again, for those of you who are joining us online, each week moving forward, we'll check in about how things went with the practice that we're aiming towards each week. And then we'll shift to a new practice. The first session was me talking for an hour. From now on, we'll be talking amongst ourselves, and then one new teaching. So hopefully it won't be quite as dense as we were last week. So we've been practicing WAG. And as I said last week, we're a learning community, and the teacher himself is also learning. So one of the things I learned was to be clearer about that the gratitude was coming from the cosmos because the cosmos is a gift. And we're going to continue to work that vein, and we're going to specifically be talking about Thomas's cosmos a little further in today's teaching, and perhaps, I hope, by the end of this teaching, you'll have more reason to dwell primarily in the cosmos with an attitude of gratitude and hold the universe and metaverse a little more lightly. So the words for today are hierarchy, participation in three ways: trace, image, and likeness, virtue, and magnanimity. Those should all be in your outline there. And if you'll turn to the second page, and if you've got a pen, you'll notice I have the blanks there to fill in, sort of like Hangman, if you ever played that. So number one was practicing WAG, if you fill in the words, and then W-A-G are the three letters at the end. The one for today is going to be nurturing. The use of that word is very deliberate. Nurturing magnanimity. You can see magnanimity as a word with a lot of letters, but that's what we're headed towards, and hopefully by the end of this teaching you'll have a sense of what it means to nurture magnanimity. I want to nurture magnanimity in myself and encourage you to do it as a way of reinforcing and strengthening something that perhaps you believe or want to believe. In our Declaration of Independence, it says in old school language, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, we would say all human beings, are created equal. In Genesis, it says, God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and then it specifies male and female. Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, each human being. And then, most recently of all, the United Nations in 1948 created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says in part, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So my question is, if you dwell primarily in the universe, in the multiverse, are those worlds enough to make sure that those three statements are true, to ground them? Or do we need something like Thomas's Cosmos to say, no, this is absolutely true with a capital T, each human being equal, made in the image and likeness of God? So that's my proposal, is that we need the cosmos. Now, hierarchy is the first word I want to wrestle with you. Like a lot of Americans, in the pandemic summer of 2020, after the death of George Floyd, I returned to something I've explored from time to time in some depth in my life, which is the mystery of race in America. So I read the current things. I read Kendi, I read D'Angelo, I returned to James Baldwin, I returned to Frederick Douglass, a whole bunch of other writers. Among the most helpful was a new book by David Livingstone Smith called On Inhumanity, Dehumanization, and How to Resist It. On inhumanity, dehumanization, and how to resist it. Smith is a philosopher at the University in New England, and he made his specialty understanding through time and across culture the phenomena of genocide. How is it that human cultures repeatedly participate in this thing, genocide? Very clearly, dehumanization. What leads to human beings behaving in such a way? And he found consistent patterns across time and across cultures. That there was a kind of slippery slope where a dominant group first singles out an ethnic or racial minority as a threat. Two, they subject that minority to discrimination and abuse, segregate them, humiliate them. Third, they no longer see them as humans, but as filthy, subhuman creatures that must be eradicated, ravenous predators. This happens over and over again. It's a kind of slippery slope. What I want to suggest, and I understand that this is a tense thing to say, is that if you are somebody who believes that it's likely you're going to vote for Joe Biden in the fall, look in your heart. How do you actually feel about those people who are MAGA? Are you at the beginning of the slippery slope? If you are going to be a Trump voter, you think, how do you feel in your heart about those people who are woke? Are you just beginning to maybe dehumanize them a little bit, categorize them, put them in a box, not wonder about them? I want us, regardless of how we're going to wrote in the fall to be people who resist it right from the beginning. And Smith's book was very helpful for me personally. It's a short book, 200 pages, 26 chapters, 25 of which I found incredibly helpful and I completely agreed with, and one, chapter 11, with which I completely disagreed. And that's where I want to go with the teaching today. That chapter was called Which Lives Matter, and in it he argues that the problem of dehumanization stems in part from our human profound mistake of creating hierarchies. And cosmic hierarchies in particular are bad. Why? Because human beings take cosmic hierarchies and then apply them to human beings themselves over and over again. And so, if only, he thinks, we could eliminate any sense of hierarchy, we'd be much better off and we'd treat other human beings better. I profoundly disagree. I believe, rather, that a profound and clear sense of cosmic hierarchy reinforces the truth that each human being was created equal. And in fact, a stronger sense of cosmic hierarchy makes it less likely that we will buy into the false notions of human hierarchy. You with me so far? Now let me make this really concrete and connect this to this Thomistic cosmos that I've been telling you about. Will you please turn to the 4th page in your packet that looks like this. It's got the little box on it. So this is taken from a book called The Summa of the Summa by Peter Kreeft. And he takes Thomas's greatest work, the Summa Theologica, pulls out the greatest hits, and then layers it with a whole bunch of footnotes and charts and stuff so that people like me, who are not trained in Thomism and how you work it, can actually follow what's going on. So this is a chart of Thomas's cosmic hierarchy. Now, there are 3 things that I want to point out about this chart. First of all, if you're a committed atheist, this whole thing isn't going to work for you at all right from the start. Why? Because look at what's at the top. God. And then what's underneath that? Angels. So if you're an atheist and don't think there's such a thing as a spiritual life, Thomas has already lost you. But also, number 1, the very bottom, is prime matter. Well, prime matter is a theological and philosophical construct. You can't measure it, divide it, have it repeated. It's saying like there's just this stuff out of which everything else is made. So first of all, if you can't posit the possibility that there's God, then this isn't going to work for you. So just to say that from the start. But if you do, I think this has a lot of explanatory power. So let me give you just 2 examples to hopefully give you an idea of what this hierarchy is all about. If you look at number 3 in this hierarchy, things, and number 4, plants, I want to share with you an image. Can you picture a really giant, awesome mountain? I think of, if you've ever been to Seattle, Mount Rainier. If you've been to Portland, Mount Hood. If you've been to Tokyo, which Chloe and I did this summer, Mount Fuji, which is right there, awesome. Looming over, gorgeous, beautiful. What a powerful, what an invitation to wonder. Well, then picture a flower this big, halfway up. What the cosmic hierarchy says is that that flower is more than that whole mountain. Why? 2 things at least. The flower can grow all by itself. And the flower can reproduce. Next year, there's going to be another flower, very likely, in that same spot. There's not going to be another Mount Fuji, or Mount Rainier, or Mount Hood. It has more life. It participates more in the life of God. So that's one example. The other example is human beings and angels. Now, if you read Scripture, you can't read Scripture and not notice over and over again that there are angels, there are divine messengers, there are gods. It's everywhere through Scripture. If you pulled out all the angels, you would completely deflate the book. So there seems to be something about spiritual messengers that the Scripture at least wants us to believe to be true. Furthermore, great psalm, Psalm 8, the psalmist says, "Oh God, you made us a little lower than the angels." So we're a little lower on the cosmic hierarchy, a lot lower than God, and a little lower than the angels. But then what's the difference? Well, Thomas says that angelic intelligences grasp things intuitively, whole, right from the start. We don't work that way. We have to reason and experience and think. We may occasionally have moments of intuition where it all comes together and we realize a truth. But that's just one little instance of participation in angelic consciousness, in angelic intelligence. So angelic intelligence is higher than us, and that's a very particular way in which it is higher than us. So there we have the cosmic hierarchy in a couple of specific examples. And what I want to say is that if we understand that we're lower than the angels, there's no human being that's as high as the angels. We're all lower. And we all have more being than that flower on the mountain, than earthworms, than chimpanzees, because of our freedom and intelligence and so forth. So, and we all do. That's true of each human being. Now I want to turn then to our second word, which is participation. We participate in this cosmos, and we participate automatically as a trace of God, as the image of God, and then we have a choice whether or not to participate as the likeness. Now, first of all, trace. Everything on this chart below God, from 7 all the way to 1, bears a trace of God. Vestige is the Latin word that's used, and vestige also can mean footprint, which is a perfect analogy. So if you walk through mud and you leave behind you a footprint, that footprint is not you, but that footprint wouldn't take that shape if it weren't for your foot, right? So that's the way God is with everything that is. God has created all of these things and has left a trace of God's self in each thing, from dirt to earthworm to tree to human being. Because we are here and breathing, we participate in the community of existing things. However, in addition, Scripture tells us, as we saw in Genesis, God says, "Let us make humankind in our own image." To use Thomas's language, that means that everything that's in the species human being, each human being, is made in that image of God. We have creative potential. We think rationally. We are free. All of which participates in a fuller way in the creativity, the rationality, and the freedom of God. Trace, image, and then Genesis says, "Let us make humankind in our image and according to our likeness." Now this is traditionally interpreted as participating in God insofar as we are beautiful, which doesn't mean exterior beauty, it means a character that's beautiful, that we are truthful, that we are honest, and that we are good. Now, how do we as human beings become good, right? Because you can be wicked and still be a human being, and always will be, right? You will always bear a trace, always bear an image, but it's optional whether or not you're good. I want to be a good person, and I want to encourage you to be a good person. The language for talking about how to be a good person is virtue, which means moral excellence. Now, traditionally, in the West, there were 4 cardinal virtues. And these 4 cardinal virtues was built on the work of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and became the norm in the Roman Empire and in the West all the way up to 1800 or so. And those 4 virtues that they believed contained all virtues are prudence, temperance, courage, and justice. Now in addition to that, Christianity came along and added, so those are the cardinal virtues. Christianity came along and added 3 more: faith, hope, love, and the greatest of these is love, right? So 7 virtues. Now, the most important book about virtue written in the last 50 years was written by a man named Alistair MacIntyre, and the title of the book is After Virtue. Now, as you might guess from the title, what MacIntyre says persuasively, I think, is that since 1800, our Western culture anyway, no longer has a commonly held sense of what the virtuous life looks like and how one is to become virtuous. That the consensus has fallen apart since 1800 or so, which means that if you want to be virtuous, you have to make a strong decision to figure out what the virtues are that you want to live by and how to live by them. So that brings us to our fourth word, right? We already had hierarchy, participation in the three ways, trace, image, likeness, virtue. And now I want to propose a virtue for us to work on this week as our practice. It's nurturing magnanimity. Now, what is magnanimity? Now, literally, if you break it in two, magna means great, and anima, this is in Greek, and anima means spirit, and is often always translated in English as heart. It means great-hearted. I'm encouraging us to become great-hearted people and to believe that by being great-hearted people, we are going to be transcending contempt. Now, as it happens, magnanimity, and I'm proposing that magnanimity be a keystone virtue for us. Keystone, if you know what a keystone is at the top of an arch, it's the one that's at the top, but that's built on the other virtues. So this is the virtue that's the culmination of all the other virtues, to be great-hearted. And I'm in good company here because Aristotle, in his greatest book about ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, which is perhaps the greatest book about ethics in the Western tradition, he has a list of 11 virtues, and he says magnanimity is the culminating virtue. He writes, magnanimity is the crown of the virtues, a sort of adornment of the moral virtues, for it makes them greater, and it does not arise without them. So I'm following a good lead here in proposing magnanimity. Two things to know about magnanimity, great-heartedness. Magnanimity is the middle way in two different ways. When Aristotle teaches on virtue, he says that the virtues are almost always middle ways. So for example, courage is the middle way between cowardice and rashness. Courage doesn't mean always charging in every situation. You got to have some prudence around it, and you got to be strong about it. So courage is the middle way between cowardice and rashness. Magnanimity, likewise, is a middle way. It's a heart that's not clenched, tight, Grinch-like, but also isn't all puffed up. It's right-sized and strong. So one question to bring into this week is, what size is your heart? And which way do you tilt? If you're not magnanimous, or the ways in which you're not magnanimous, are you more like the Grinch, or are you more like puffed up and egotistical? The goal is to have a heart that's right-sized and strong, the middle way between tight and puffed up. That's one way in which it's a middle way. There's another way identified by C.S. Lewis in a lecture that he gave right after World War II. He was really worried about the state of education in England, and so he gave a talk that's, again, old school language, but is relevant for all human beings. The title of the talk is Men Without Chests, but we can say human beings without chests. And what he complains about is that he said back then, and I believe it continues to be true, that as educators, we're really good at educating our students' minds. And I think that continues to be true. And we're really good at satisfying their guts, and feeding them, feeling them with a certain kind of strength. But we're not good about nurturing their hearts, hence students without chests. He writes, he concludes the lecture actually by saying, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ, that is the heart, and demand the function. We make students without chests and demand of them virtue and enterprise. So what I'm proposing is that we practice magnanimity as a way to strengthen what's between our heads and our guts and to be balanced people. And C.S. Lewis says the way to do that is to practice just sentiments. Just, not as in only, but just as in proportionate, right. So let me give you an example. And let me give you an example of a practice of how I nurture magnanimity in myself. I know that one of the ways that my heart swells or is strengthened with just sentiments is through songs. So for example, there are certain hymns on Sunday morning that I can't get through without crying. I can't sing them anymore. I think every year, Chris Hammond and I, on Palm Sunday, Ah, Holy Jesus, we can't get through the line, I crucified thee, because we're in tears. And to me, that is a sign that my heart is being tutored in just sentiments. Another example is I can't stand it when people do the national anthem in NFL games and they're too bombastic. However, I adore it in certain kinds of circumstances. So, for example, several years ago, our chancel choir was invited to sing the national anthem in an arrangement by our music director's son at the Pacifics game. And there I was with a hot dog and a beer watching my church choir sing this cool arrangement of the national anthem with a Jackson's Hardware banner across the outfield. And I couldn't make it all the way through. Like, I was just so filled with gratitude to be American at a baseball game. It was awesome. A third example is that I mentioned last week my love and support of a young woman, teenager in our parish, Zoe. And she participates in the high school musicals over at Archie Williams. And I love going to high school musicals. I love the energy, I love the creativity, I love the zaniness, I love the community that you can see emerging. It just brings tears to my eyes. And I feel like that, again, is my heart being nurtured in just sentiments. And I believe I am learning in those moments to be more magnanimous. Now, a couple of concluding thoughts here. First of all, I'm inviting you to nurture magnanimity, which means you already have a heart. You already have some things to which you have just sentiments. So I'm not asking you to strive and go after something that you don't already have. I'm asking you to be like an organic gardener with your own heart. What's the soil like that your heart is planted in? Are you giving it water and light and helping it grow and grow strong? So nurturing is deliberately used. Pay attention to your heart. What can you do to nurture it and to give it strength? As I told you, music is my thing, and attend to whether it's tight or puffed up and you want it strong. The second is magnanimous hearts are not contemptuous hearts. They don't get caught up in the anger and the fear that are at the roots of contempt. Magnanimous hearts are able to wonder, non-anxiously behold other people, and wonder what's going on with them. They're able to pay attention, like Simone Weil, look at your neighbor and say, wonder, what are you going through? And magnanimous hearts are able to be grateful. There's a moment in our worship service when the offering plate comes up to the altar, and I hold it up and I say, all things come of thee, O Lord, and everybody says, and of thine own have we given thee. I put the plate down, and then the very next thing I do is begin the Eucharistic prayer where I say, lift up your hearts. And everybody says, we lift them up to the Lord. This is an example of gratitude, and it's also an example of practicing nurturing magnanimity. Two final notes. First of all, the last section in the packet that I've handed out to all of you is a series of 3 reflections that I gave at a men's club this last summer on magnanimity, and it fleshes out what magnanimity is and how you can experience it. I just want to warn you that I was actually talking to a bunch of men, but that it's relevant to whatever gender you identify as. So just to be really clear that that's what that is. You'll also notice in the outline I talk about Jane Austen and constancy as a virtue. I didn't talk about that in this little talk, but it is in the reflections that I gave. So if you want to have another example of what a keystone virtue might be, you can take a look at that. So to summarize, and then I'll take questions, we'll go a little bit over here. 5 things. 1, I believe that we all dwell or are invited to dwell primarily in the cosmos, which means creation as an ongoing gift of God to which our proper response is gratitude. 2, within that cosmos, that gift, there is a great chain of being, this hierarchy, where each human being, every single human being, takes their proper place together at the same level of being in this hierarchy of being. Above earthworms, a little lower than the angels. None are like earthworms, none are like angels. We're all in the same place. Trace, image, likeness. Each human being always already participates as a trace of God and in the image of God. The only one that we have a choice about is whether or not we become in the likeness of God. So the 4th thing, the question for us is, do we want to be people who also fulfill our potential, open to every human being, to also participate in God through the likeness of God? And if so, 5, I invite you to nurture one important virtue to help you to be good: magnanimity, great-heartedness, neither puffed up nor tight, and uniting the head and the guts here through nurturing just sentiments. Now, we'll take a few minutes and I'll answer questions. So does anybody have any questions about nurturing magnanimity? So it's all perfectly clear. Yes, Chip.
So I'm just thinking, as you're going through the hierarchy of the cosmos between the angel and men, and angels are at the level of pure form, it sounds a lot like Plato's allegory of the cave.
Mm-hmm.
We men are in the cave we people in the cave looking at the shadows of the walls, while the philosophers or the angels are outside with the pure forms. Is that a...
Yep. I think that's a fine analogy, that they get it. And with the modification that there aren't just angels out there, there are also fallen angels, that there are also evil spirits. And we'll be talking more about that in the 4th session when we talk about goodness and evil. But that's right. It's in that middle place between God. Divine ideas is another Christian word used for forms. Good thought. Yes, Rose.
Christopher, I'm confused as to where might the prophets fit into this scheme of things.
So Rose is asking where the prophets might fit into the scheme of things. One way to think perhaps about prophets is that we have intuitions from time to time about what's true, a sort of angelic, a little foretaste of angelic consciousness. Well, prophets are people who occasionally saw very clearly how God was at work in the world, and then were able to capture that in words and images that haunt us to this day. And we honor them because we think that they caught a little glimpse of something larger than what most of us see most of the time. So that might be one way to think about the prophets. Yes, Chris.
Personally, in my own case, I'm trying to think about not being so much of a jerk and being more of a mensch.
Yes.
Identity is about being a mensch.
I love it, yes. More mensch, less jerk. That's the goal of this class. Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah. More mensch, less jerk. Yes.
I was wondering if you could maybe flesh out, because I wasn't here last week, so just wondering the difference between like wag and then
Magnanimity.
Because I think about how like wonder produces this, for at least for me, less like full attention, and then it goes into this gratitude.
Yes.
Like, right? And then, so what is like, I guess, the difference in practicing that versus practicing nurturing magnanimity? Like, is it more of like, is magnanimity like something that does something within my like heart, like I can feel it, like
Yes.
there's some type of connection, or I just want to like flesh that out.
No, it's a great question. I mean, basic, what I'm hearing is, what's the connection between wonder, attention, and gratitude, and then nurturing magnanimity? Because in our experience, or in your experience perhaps, wonder, attention, and gratitude actually nurtures magnanimity.
Yeah, I guess.
I think those things are connected. It's, it's like learning anything new. Sometimes you want to break something down a bunch so that you can then start doing it unself-consciously. And part of the point of doing a class like this is to break it down, to see if you can differentiate and see if you learn something new or strengthen the way we are in the world. I mean, eventually, wouldn't it be wonderful if in 3 or 4 months you've practiced this enough so that you take a step back and say, wow, I just did that without even thinking about it. My heart is swollen up, I paid attention, I wondered in a way that I didn't find threatening, and I'm really grateful for that. And it's all sort of one thing. You have to like break it down when in fact it wasn't experienced that, it was experienced whole. So there's no strict separation. I'm trying to break this down for myself and for us to see if we can, step into this reality of being magnanimous together. Other questions? Yes, Pat.
That's another way of thinking of this, when you think of people as hard-hearted.
Yes.
They have no heart. Or you could say, I want to soften my heart. I want to open up my heart.
I think that's right on. So Pat's plugging into, it is biblical language, right? I mean, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. But hard-hearted is exactly the opposite of magnanimity. And part of being magnanimous is being capable of being vulnerable, but with strength, right? I mean, it's a really careful balance. Like, how vulnerable can you be and yet still be strong, still be magnanimous, still be generous? Again, it's a middle way. Like, you don't want to be so hard-hearted, but just as you don't want to be puffed up, you don't want to be so vulnerable so all the time that after a while you've got nothing to give.
Or that you cry at every plant that is pulled from the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Or every single hymn or whatever, Yeah. I've never cried at Come Labor On. Like, that hymn has never really done it for me. Other questions? Do you feel like you... Oh, yes, Alexis.
I was, when you were talking about the chart, or the hierarchy, as it were,
Yeah.
I was just, something went right off in my head like a light bulb. And I've been so intimidated by the universe and power, my understanding of power that's going on in the universe right now, and how intimidated I am by this horrible thing every time I turn around, that the people are putting this power on me, politically. And I had this thing that came up when you said the flower. The flower grows, the mountain does not grow. To me, that gives me a facility to understand that the power is not inanimate.
No. There's a lot there in what you just said about power and different kinds of power. If I'm hearing you correctly, this is where we're going to end up in the 5th teaching, where we're going to go back to Simone Weil. We learned about attention with Simone Weil. She chooses a word to talk about the power in the universe, force. And just as we perhaps had a broader sense of what attention is, Simone Weil is going to give us a broader sense of what force is, and it's the kind of power in the universe that can be so intimidating and dehumanizing. And we're going to be particularly riffing off of her essay, Iliad, the Iliad as the poem of force, just to give you a hint. But I think that's right. We all, to say that we live cosmologically in radical equality with each human being isn't to deny that that's not how we experience life with human beings now, because we do, but that's fallen, that's not the cosmos that God created. And if we can be people who dwell in the cosmos with this sense of power, understanding that the human expression of power is very often a bad caricature of true power, perhaps we can approach reality and this stressful election year with a different lens and be the beacons of light and love that I'm inviting us all to learn to be in this class. Yes, Rose?
I'm going to invoke a sense of courage, possibly, to force myself. I had to force myself because that man's voice raises my blood pressure. I can prove it by taking a reading before and after he speaks, by suggesting that our wonderful library system offers an opportunity, an invitation to listen to what is called an audio tape called the Trump tapes. It's Bob Woodward.
Yes.
I think most people in this room know who Bob Woodward is, interviewing the man. Just saying his name makes my blood pressure goes up, but that's okay. And I listened to all 5 CDs, and I forced myself to not talk, not comment, not crosstalk, not say anything. And it's been an amazing experience. It probably wasn't good for my blood pressure, but and I got a very slightly turned sense of what this is all about.
Perhaps you were able to approach it with some sense of wonder. What's going on here? Yeah. Any other final questions? Yes.
It appears to me that the real problem that exists in discussion of magnanimity is that we deal with individuals, all my family believes I'm an outcast as a result of this. So how do I deal with a norm that I can't respond to because I'm outcast and can't even bother to discuss them in a rational fashion?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to kick the can down the road because next week, this actually gives me an opportunity to talk about next week's practice, where we're going to talk about our temporal halo and those who are in our lives and how we pray and attend to those in our lives who may have views that are different than ours, political and otherwise, but certainly in this political season. How can we lay the groundwork of prayer and attention such that we can start to at least subtly shift the relationship we have with those in our lives who may have very strongly held views that are different than ours, still respecting them as made in the image and likeness of God. But it's no small thing. It's no small thing. So what I'm trying to do is build up a sense of things that gradually maybe can help us attend to exactly the sort of heartbreak that I would imagine that we all experience some places in our lives. So wonder, attention, gratitude, magnanimity. Next week we'll look at our temporal halo and what that means and how we can get into a daily practice that perhaps can help strengthen and shift our relationship with our loved ones. But this week the practice is nurturing magnanimity. I think you know what the format is. Hopefully you'll join us again in person, or you're also welcome to join us, those of you who are watching on YouTube through Zoom. Just go to our website, stpaulsanrafael.org. Look under the tab Events and you'll see Transcending Contempt. That'll take you to where you can get the handout, the PDF, and then also the link to Zoom so you can join Tanner in a live discussion next week if you can't join us here in person. Thank you. I want to conclude with just a few thank yous. I want to thank Tanner and Dennis, who helped make the remote work possible. I want to thank Mike and Tom, who were our greeters. I want to thank Judy, who set up our hospitality, and Jessica, who came up with our logo here, and Shelley and Lori, who helped spread the word. So thank you to all of you. This is a team effort, and we're doing this together as a community. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week for session 3 of Transcending Contempt.